To travel as a spiritual practice is to travel everywhere you go as a pilgrim, even if it's to the store to pick up a few things. While driving around Portugal this summer, you're going to hear about it for the whole year, so just settle in. We listened to books, and one of the books we listened to was Travel is a Political Act by Rick Steves, that American tour guide, travel writer, PBS show, that dude. And I realized as we were listening to this book, driving through Portugal, that the things he was talking about in terms of travel as a political act, that most of them were things that also make travel a spiritual practice. In order to talk about travel as a spiritual practice that increases compassion for others and oneself, probably best to talk about what I'm meaning by travel and what I mean by spiritual practice. I think a spiritual practice is something you do intentionally, regularly, wholeheartedly, and with a sense of consecration, connecting to yourself and to something beyond yourself, greater than yourself, whether that be God or the divine, the universe, humanity, however you conceive of that. And the term spiritual practice, I know it conjures up instant images for lots of people of prayer, of meditation, of yoga, of Tai Chi, of journaling maybe. But many other things can be spiritual practices. And you may not think of them as such at first. Walking, martial arts, weightlifting, reading, studying, cooking, gardening, woodworking, singing, playing an instrument, painting, drawing, dancing, advocating for others, volunteering at Dorothy Day. It is not so much about what you do that makes something a spiritual practice, but how and why you do it. The example I tend to use all the time, and some of you may have heard me say this, is walking the dog. Rushing home from work, putting the dog on the leash, hustling the dog down the sidewalk for 15 to 20 minutes while making a work call, and then ordering takeout for dinner, hustling the dog back in, dumping kibble in the bowl, and shooting out to grab the pizza you just ordered. Not a spiritual practice. Taking the dog for a 45, 60-minute, 90-minute walk, maybe through your neighborhood in the woods, on a regular basis, noticing the change of seasons day by day everywhere you go. The stillness in the river or the lake you walk by. Saying hello to the neighbors who you'll all know the names of each other's dogs, but maybe not each other's name. And getting to know their names. Pondering what's going on in your life, in the world. Maybe thinking about something very wise and spiritual the clergy person at your church said last Sunday. Definitely a spiritual practice in my book. It's not about what you do, it's about how and why you do it. And spiritual practices are for everybody. They don't even need to be religious at all. At their core, they're things that foster a holistic sense of our humanness, our human spirit, if nothing else. And if it's a lot more else for you, that's great too. They create a sense of groundedness, well-being. They help us be resilient and better able to deal with the ups and downs and struggles and hardships of life, as well as celebrate the joys more heartily. A spiritual practice deepens your understanding of yourself and others and the world around you. It opens your heart. Spiritual practices help us deal with the big questions of life, the meaning of life, love, beauty, death, evil, goodness. Spiritual practices encourage personal growth, and over time, because they must be done regularly and over time, they will transform you if you practice. You will be a different person, and usually in many beneficial ways, from the person you were when you began the practice. Because spiritual practices work like this, they foster a sense of compassion for yourself and for others. And a traveler is someone who travels, who goes to different places. Tourists are short-term travelers, and although they may go on extended trips, they plan to eventually return to where they came from. We tend to think of ourselves a lot as not being tourists because of the negative stereotypes that can get attached to the tourist. We can sometimes think of, I travel, those are tourists. But the reality is, if you're coming back, you're a tourist. If you're going to stay where you're going, you're an immigrant. An immigrant, someone who travels to intentionally remain somewhere at the end of the journey. A nomad is someone who travels as a lifestyle. A refugee is someone forced to travel by trauma or violence or war, natural disaster. A pilgrim is someone who travels for religious or spiritual reasons to sacred or special places in order to be transformed by the journey. To travel as a spiritual practice is to travel everywhere you go as a pilgrim, even if it's to the store to pick up a few things. Travel can be a spiritual practice because you can travel intentionally, repetitively, regularly, wholeheartedly, and with a sense of consecration. Something deep within yourself and something beyond yourself. Being an intentional traveler requires thoughtful planning and being thoughtful and reflective about your travel. Not only where you're going, but how and why. Will you get where you're going on foot, bicycle, car, train, boat, airplane? Some of these methods of travel are horrible for the environment, especially plane engines. Travel and tourism can certainly be elitist and exploitative. Travel impacts economics, the environment, culture, and politics. To travel intentionally as a spiritual practice, we must consider the impact on the places and the people we travel to, not just our intentions as travelers. The best intentions can have traumatic impact. The biggest impact of travel is economic. Do you know tourism is now responsible for over 10% of the global economy? That's more than agriculture. It accounts for 1 in every 5 new jobs currently being created, travel and tourism. It's a growth industry up 6% globally, more than twice as much as any other world industry. Its economic impact is drastic. So if you're spending money to travel, where's this money going? What are you spending it on? Who will profit or not? And who should? There's been a backlash against travel and tourism in many places around the world in recent years. Spain has had very vocal protests against tourism. There were some in Portugal. Italy's had some. And yet, at the same time, travel has literally saved some local communities around the world from extinction by transforming the way they are and see themselves. How local and national governments manage tourism and travel has a huge impact on reducing the harmful effects and enhancing its benefits. Countries are learning to listen to their residents and native communities about protecting land, establishing policies that welcome visitors, but that also don't run off their own people from being able to afford to live in their own homes, in their own cities. Perhaps most importantly, one of the things that's changing about travel is that more and more and more people who travel are more aware of its impact and its multidimensional ethical ramifications, and are trying to travel more compassionately. To travel intentionally, the first thing to be aware of perhaps is who you are as a traveler. Some tourists, in stereotype, often Americans sadly, wave a selfie stick about, treat famous sacred or historical sites as a prop for their Instagram, loudly ignore local customs, norms, and values, and insist on having their loud English-speaking way wherever they go. They jam people and places and cultures into preconceived ideas of who and what they should be, which makes genuine empathy and compassion really difficult. But The New Tourist, which is the eponymous title of Paige McClanahan's book from 2024. I highly recommend The New Tourist by Paige McClanahan. The new tourist, she says, and increasingly so, is humbled by their travels, which open their eyes to the great stretch of history and the vast sea of humanity. The new tourist embraces diversity and difference and wants to learn about and from other people. So to travel intentionally, I think, means to expect to not bring your comforts with you, to expect to be a guest, to expect not to be at home wherever you are, to try and disengage privilege, accept a little discomfort and convenience. The next aspect of travel as spiritual practice is you got to do it wholeheartedly. You got to make it a deep experience. You have to go all in, give it your best shot, wherever you go. Paige McClanahan says, take the time to learn something about where you're going. Maybe something unexpected, she writes, something complicated or something that breaks open a tourist cliche or an accepted truth that's not true. Be courageous as a traveler. Don't be afraid. Rick Steve says, I remember when the standard farewell when I set off on a trip was bon voyage. Now it's have a safe trip. To which I always want to say, have a safe stay at home, because where I'm going is statistically much safer than you staying here in America. Think of that. Choosing to go off the beaten path a little is really important. In Portugal, of course, we went to Lisbon and Porto, and we did touristy things, of course. But we also went to sleepy little villages in the middle of the Alentejo. We stayed in Salema, not Lagos in the Algarve. Little village. 2 hotels, not 17. And we went to Évora, and we went to the university town of Coimbra. We got out of the car and walked 5 kilometers off the highway to see standing stones 2,000 years older than Stonehenge, 90 of them out in the middle of the farmland. To travel wholeheartedly, perhaps choose small family-run hotels. Or in Portugal, they have things called quartos, which is kind of like renting a room in someone's private home. It's kind of like an Airbnb, but without the website and all this stuff. You see older Portuguese women sitting in the plazas with a sign, Quarto, 20 euros for the night, includes dinner and breakfast. You know, eat like a local, not a tourist. It's more authentic and it costs a lot less, because any place you eat aimed at a tourist is going to be a lot more money. In Portugal, we targeted street food, grilled sardines on a slice of whole grain bread, shaved pork sandwiches called bifanas, which really deserve to have fast food chains all over the world. We targeted small neighborhood family-run restaurants. They're called tashkas. And usually you would hear very little English in them at all. And usually we would be the only tourist in these places. We're glad we learned a little language. Some of them we wouldn't have eaten in without. When I went to Transylvania to visit a partner church many years ago, stayed in a little village, a couple hundred people, in 10 days I ate all but 2 meals in someone's home. Traveling wholehearted means don't just go to tourist things. Go to museums, but also go find the local street art. Souvenir shops are great and fine. I visited many on my recent trip, but I also went to a lot of farmers markets and artist collectives. Went to a community art collaborative makerspace and learned about the history of azulejos, the little blue tiles that are everywhere in Portugal, because we wanted to get one, but we learned that there's a huge black market trade in these now, and a lot of them are being pried off historic buildings and sold. So we're like, oh, we don't want to do that. So instead, we bought ones that were made as replicas, and we went to a class and learned how to make and paint them and how they're made instead. Go deep. Dive into traveling, dive into the experience. The most amazing encounters and conversations I've had traveling anywhere were things I don't have photographs or video of and never got posted to social media because I was too busy being in the moment to remember all that stuff. You know, I had conversations with Roma in Romania, in Transylvania, when I went to visit the partner church. Don't have pictures of the people I talked to. Was too entranced by their experience. Had a waiter in a neighborhood Tashka in Lisbon who taught us how to eat the grilled sardines. They're finger food. You put them on bread, you eat them like this. He called himself our sardine sensei. Don't have his photo. We were too busy learning how to eat sardines and laughing and joking with him, half in Portuguese. In Salema in the Algarve, I watched a fisherman mend a net for about a half hour. Totally forgot to take his picture. I don't have a photo of the elderly couple who lived across the street from Reverend Noemi in Cecafalva in Romania, who brought me over a fresh baked loaf of bread one morning with jam for my breakfast. Traveling wholeheartedly also means not shying away from the hard stuff of traveling. You can't escape or run away from the difficulties of life to travel wholeheartedly. Everywhere I've traveled, there's been poverty and racism. I saw both poverty and racism when I went to Transylvania and when I went to Portugal. In Portugal, we were looking for the Azulejo Museum, and we stumbled on to a homeless encampment, totally by accident, but we didn't leave. We walked through. The person at our Airbnb told us we shouldn't have done that when we got home. But I almost literally stepped into an area under a footbridge the homeless community used as a latrine. And yes, it was as gross as you're imagining that I'm not going to say out loud. There were shanty towns in Lisbon, mostly made up of immigrants from the former African colonies of Portugal. There are some neighborhoods in Lisbon that smelled exceedingly of urine. Outside a couple of the hotels where we stayed, there were homeless people. We gave them our stuff when we left. We had gotten a yoga mat when we got there because we didn't travel with it and stuff like that. And we left them with things. In Transylvania, I went to the outermost neighborhood of this little village of like 300 people where the Roma lived. And Reverend Noemi employed some Roma working in her lavender farm that helped support the congregation. But in a village of 300 people in the middle of nowhere in Romania, there's a ghetto segregated by race. You can't escape the difficulties while traveling either. It's real everywhere. But it helps you get a more holistic perspective of all the things, good and bad, that exist where you live too. Traveling wholeheartedly is to sink into the relationships with the places and the people you visit, whether they're very far away or very close to home. A spiritual practice requires regularity. You have to do it repetitively. So travel can be costly. So how do we do this repetitively and regularly? Well, the key is to be a pilgrim when you travel, to make everywhere you go a pilgrimage, near or far. So make it a habit to travel often, if not a long way from home. For example, you can travel 15 minutes from right here, this spot, by foot right now, and hear conversations in Greek, Arabic, and Hebrew. They're right down the street. You can eat food, 15-minute walk from here, right on Clapham Ridge Road. You can eat food from the Middle East and the Mediterranean and explore a completely different religion. 15-minute walk away. You can travel 15 minutes from this spot by car and hear conversations in Spanish and Portuguese, Polish and Italian, and probably many other things. There are places within a 15-minute drive of this spot where you can drink coffee as it is served in Brazil or Ecuador or Rome, and learn how different the immigrant experience is between the undocumented from Europe and the undocumented from Latin America. 15 minutes from here, you can be as disoriented and uncomfortable as you can be if you traveled to another continent. You don't have to spend a lot of money to travel meaningfully and spiritually. You don't need to spend hundreds of dollars to fly somewhere. 15 minutes from here, by foot or car, you can feel like a tourist. So travel to a new park. Try out a new walking or biking trail. Go to another town in Connecticut you've not yet been to just to go there sometime. Look for the different culture and the different people who are right next to you. Don't make the world come to you. Go to the world. Do you know your 5 physically closest neighbors by name? My mom lives in a senior housing thing. I think she knows everyone there, about 100 different residents in different apartments. I think she knows everyone there. Have you had a cup of tea with those neighbors? You can travel next door. You don't even need to leave your home to travel as a spiritual practice. There are dozens of wonderful travel programs. Travel somewhere you've always wanted to go to by going to the public library and getting a travel guidebook to that place and go through it. Watch YouTube channels. Listen to podcasts. Travel begins by imagining the places you'll go, whether it's down the street or across the world. Read. Watch video. research about places near and far. And spiritual practice, travel as spiritual practice, requires this consecration, a sense of connecting to yourself and something beyond you. Traveling connects you to humanity. To make the world small, live as a pilgrim, not a tourist. Mary Oliver writes in a poem, "When Death Comes, I don't want to end up just having visited this place." Don't just visit in this life. Get to know the people and places deeply, and not just the ones you're always comfortable with. Let the visiting, the travel, whether you go down the street or around the world, let it transform you. Paige McClanahan says, travel makes the new tourist empathetic and compassionate. Travel, she says, inoculates us against anyone who might try to convince us to hate or look down on different people, those who speak other languages or worship other gods or just happen to live on the other side of a border. At our showing of the movie The Encampments on Friday night, our featured speaker afterwards mentioned that so many Americans don't even have a passport. One of the reasons we are so divided, he mentioned, was that we don't know anything except what it's just like to be us here at home. I wonder if we had not national mandatory military service, but that everyone between the ages of 18 and 21 needs to go travel somewhere around the world and just be there for a year. What a different population we'd have after that. Rick Steve says, ideally, travel broadens our perspectives personally, culturally, and politically. Suddenly, the palette with which we paint the story of our lives has more color. As a traveler, he says, I've often found that the more a culture differs from my own, the more I am struck by its essential humanity. And that type of attitude, that type of intention toward travel makes it not only a political act, but a spiritual one. The core quality it improves in the traveler is empathy and compassion for others, all others. Because of this, I think travelers, and we're all travelers, and we're all potential travelers, all travelers should see themselves as pilgrims on a sacred journey that transforms us into new people, people more in touch with ourselves, with others, and the world than we were before. Check out my website and blog at tonylorenzen.com for even more resources that will open your mind, touch your heart, and inspire your spirit.